So hello everyone, my name is Yuritza Escalante and I'm a fourth year psychology major, and I worked on this project alongside the guidance of graduate student researcher Jing Wang and Dr. Misaki Natsuaki. And so today I will be presenting on observing the effect of mindfulness practices on loneliness and solitude in college students with openness as a moderator. All right. So along with the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the major shifts that happened was time spent in isolation. So with all of the lockdown restrictions that were put in place, many people were forced to spend more time within isolation. And the thing with social isolation is that this is related to emotions that are linked to well-being, one that is more positively correlated and one is that is more negatively. So one emotion that can arise during social isolation is loneliness. So loneliness is the feeling that arises when a person's actual real life social relationships are not in line with their desired social relationships. And loneliness can be detrimental to a person's health. Loneliness can be concerning because it is associated with psychological and physiological health risks, such as depression and cardiovascular health risks. In addition, there was a survey conducted by Cigna in 2018 that found that individuals aged 18 to 22 scored the highest on loneliness among all of the age groups. And this survey is actually what inspired the age group for my study. So my study looks into college students, which is within this age group. And then another emotion that can arise during social isolation is a feeling of solitude. So this one is more positively correlated. This refers to when a person feels content with being alone, and past research has found that this can improve that solitude can be a protective factor for well-being. And so these are the two emotions that this study is focused on examining. And this study sought to see if we could either increase or decrease these emotions. And the practice that we used to examine this effect is by using mindfulness. So past research has found that mindfulness has shown to improve emotion self-regulation. And with having that emotion self-regulation strategy, it in turn improves the person's overall well-being. Therefore, mindfulness was used as a tool to do that, and to increase or decrease loneliness or solitude. And then in addition, a personality trait that we were interested in observing is openness to experience. And the reason why we were particularly interested in this personality trait is because in mindfulness practices, they mention that having an open mind is a vital factor for these mindfulness practices to be effective. So sort of for the person to be open in the benefits that this mindfulness practice could bring to them, especially if this is something that is new to the person. Therefore, within this study, the main questions that we were seeking, that we were seeking to answer is if a mindfulness practice is effective in decreasing loneliness and increasing solitude, particularly within college students, and also whether openness will serve as a personality trait to enhance the beneficial effects of mindfulness. So within this study, we recruited 86 college students that attend the University of California, Riverside. And these college students were randomly assigned into two groups. So 44 were in the intervention group and 42 in the control group. And the mean age of these participants was around 19 years old. So within the specified age range that I had mentioned earlier, and the majority of these participants came from an Asian and or Hispanic or Latino background. So 44% were Asian and 35% came from a Hispanic or Latino background. And so the way that this experiment was set up was that this is so the participants took place in a 7-day longitudinal study. And so on the first day, day one, participants were told to take a series of questionnaires that measured them on their openness, loneliness, solitude, and we also measured for self-care. So that was day one. And then on the respective scale that is shown right here, And then on the following days, so days 2 through 6, the following 5 days, the participants that were placed in the intervention group were told to do 5-minute mindfulness exercises, one each day. And then in addition to a mood check-in, and then the control group were told to simply do the mood check-in. And then after these 5 days passed, on the 7th day, all participants were told to retake the set of surveys measuring for loneliness and solitude, so that way we can observe or examine whether mindfulness will have an effect on loneliness and solitude. And so what we found, so after the data was gathered, we first looked into whether there was a difference in the loneliness and solitude levels of participants that were placed in the mindfulness group compared to in the control group. And unfortunately, we were not able to observe a great enough difference among the two groups. And then in addition, furthermore, we did look into whether openness would have an impact on whether the people that engaged in a mindfulness practice, whether it would be more effective for those higher in openness compared to lower in openness. But again, we did not observe a big enough difference. But however, upon looking on the variables, something that we did find is when examining self-care, just overall in general, we did find that the participants that engaged more in self-care practices did also experience lower levels of loneliness. And in addition, when we observed, when we looked into openness as a personality trait, we did find that the participants that were higher on openness did also experience an increase in solitude. So these people were more able to spend time content alone. And then, so for the results, so overall, we found that a 5-minute mindfulness intervention did not influence either loneliness or solitude, even for those that are with higher levels of openness. But however, we did find that self-care could potentially serve as a protective factor against feeling these feelings of loneliness, these distressing feelings of loneliness. And individuals higher on openness do tend to be more content with spending time alone. So a couple of limitations to this study is that we did get a small sample size. We had only recruited 86 participants when ideally we wanted much more. In addition, the mindfulness exercise was only 5 minutes long, so maybe 5 minutes is simply not enough time to produce the beneficial effects that have been seen with mindfulness practices in past research. Also, the way that these surveys were administered was through an online format. Therefore, so participants were emailed a link and told to complete the mindfulness exercise. And because this study was carried out online, maybe the intervention may have not been as engaging as, say, if the participants were told to do this in person. Lastly, also, so mindfulness is a broad term that can encompass multiple practices. So within this study in particular, we examined the effectiveness of mindfulness guided videos, in which a person was simply listening to a video and they would follow the instruction. So therefore, it is possible that mindfulness videos may just not be an effective practice of mindfulness. And maybe there are other mindfulness practices that are more likely to produce more beneficial effects, such as maybe going on a walk or journaling. Therefore, future research should seek to examine the effect of longer lasting daily mindfulness exercises, and also the impact of different kinds of mindfulness practices. But however, nevertheless, self-care does show to be beneficial to examine in association with loneliness, since there was an effect going on with self-care more broadly, even though we were not able to see that effect more particularly with mindfulness. And in addition, openness as a personality trait does remain to be worthwhile to observe when looking into solitude. So there is something going on with people that are higher in openness, that they are able to be more content spending this time alone. And lastly, I would like to thank my faculty advisor, again, Dr. Misaki Natsuaki, graduate students and research assistants that helped guide and complete this experiment. This project was supported by the Developmental Transitions Lab and funded by the Chancellor's Research Fellowship. But yeah, that's the end of my presentation, and I am now open to taking any questions. Again, thank you all too for for being here and listening to my presentation as well.
Thank you, Yuritza. Oh, don't forget to turn